So what tips would you give to an advocate or a service provider who's in the position of talking to an older victim about the existence of this responsibility of mandatory reporting?
I think it's something that can easily be part of your regular intake. I mean, when you're talking to a new client and explaining to them what services you can offer, what things you can do, what things you can't do, it's an easy next step to explain that one of your requirements as a licensed professional is to make these reports when you think there's a risk of harm. And then be very specific in explaining what your agency protocols are about that, what your personal guidelines are about that. And it's important, I think, to be clear about that with the client at the outset, partly because transparency enhances trust with the client, and that's the goal for all the work that we do. But also because that allows the client to then make choices about what information they want to reveal to you and what information they want to keep private.
I do think it's important to talk to people about mandatory reporting because there's a lot of half information or misinformation out there about it in the culture. So I don't think it's sufficient to just say, oh, and I'm a mandatory reporter, because the person you're talking to might think it means more than it does, so they might be overly chilled in their willingness to speak with you, and they might think it means less than it does. So having a discussion about how you would handle it, asking them, is there anything about that that worries you? Is there anything that you want to talk about in terms of what it means to be a mandatory reporter, or what I would or wouldn't do before you start talking about what's happened to you, or start asking, or I start asking you questions. So it's just a checking in with the person. But I like a colleague taught me the idea of saying to people, is there anything about that that worries you, which is different from saying, do you have any questions? And I think, is there anything that worries you is a better place to start.
So if you're talking to an older adult and you suspect you might be a mandated reporter, providing information up front so that that victim can choose the information that she shares and know what might happen if she provides some information that you may need to make a report. So saying something up front. If you identify that you need to make a report, talking to her to preserve as much autonomy as possible. Is she interested or willing to make the call herself? Does she want to be in the room while you call and make the report? Having conversations about the impact, and then being there with her throughout the entire process, if in any way that works for her. So if she is interested in having you be there when she's interviewed, when other steps might happen, at least offering that as a resource.
We have to look at mandatory reporting when we're thinking about safety planning. You know, what's going to happen? Has a mandatory report been made? If a mandatory report has been made, what are the next steps? Is someone going to be talking to the perpetrator? How does the victim think the perpetrator is going to react to that? When are they going to be talking to the perpetrator? Do we want to get the victim out of the house or when they talk to that perpetrator? So really thinking about all the steps that are going to happen if a mandatory report is made. Is law enforcement going to be involved? And so I think that's another area where advocates really need to get strong on understanding the mandatory reporting system in their community.